Hi everyone, this is Talia Argandesi, the Director of the Center for Writing and Speaking at our Science College, and I'm here to walk you through the process of generating a thesis statement. So first we should talk about just what is the purpose of your first paragraph of any paper in general. Your reader always wants to know just why are they reading this paper. So you can follow this pretty easy acronym, ACT, to think about what to put into your introduction. So the A in ACT stands for attention grabber. Something that comes really early in the paper that is immediately interesting to the reader. And that can be pretty short. You want to spend a lot of your introduction on the C in ACT, the context conversation. In other words, is there any background information that the reader needs to know to understand your paper? What sorts of things are people saying or people thinking about the texts or ideas or research that you're writing about? And then usually the last sentence in your introduction is the T, the thesis statement. And that's what we're going to spend our time talking about today. So a lot of times when people think of a thesis statement, they will say it's a summary sentence for the whole paper. And in a way that's true. It is supposed to sum up what you're going to talk about in your paper. But I think it's important to consider that the thesis statement should be a little bit more than that, not just a summary, but it should put forth an argument or claim. In other words, it's not just a summary, instead it's the thing that you're trying to prove in your paper. So we're going to follow a step-by-step process for coming up with some ideas for your thesis statement. If you have an accompanying worksheet, you can turn to it now. The first thing to think about is to answer the certain question about your topic. What do you want to write about in your essay? So here's an example. I want to write about the concepts of liberty and democracy in the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Sentiments, and I Have a Dream. So you just fill this in yourself. I want to write about blank. What do you want to write about? One hint is be specific. Don't just say what text you want to write about, but try to identify what ideas within those texts you want to talk about. Pause the video right now to do step 1 if you need to. And then move on to step 2, which is to think about what problem with your topic are you trying to address. The question is, what is something that interests you about this topic, some mystery or intriguing element? And here's an example. The interesting, intriguing, weird aspect about this topic that I want to explore is that the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Sentiments, and I Have a Dream are all reactions to the majority oppressing the minority in a democratic society. I want to explore what happens when a majority of democratic voters want to oppress a minority. So, you have a template to fill in here. The interesting, intriguing, weird aspect about this topic that I want to explore is blank. Pause the video to answer step 2. And let's move on to step 3, which is to think about the purpose of your paper. So the question is, what is your motive for wanting to explore this? Why does it matter? Why is it significant? And this is the most important question. So the example is, I'm talking about all this stuff because I want to convince my readers that two concepts that usually seem to work together, liberty and democracy, can sometimes contradict. So here's your template to fill in. I want to explore this interesting aspect of my topic because I want to convince my reader that blank. Pause the video and fill in the answer, your ideas for this step 3. And we're going to take a minute here to talk more generally about thesis statements. What you have now on your worksheet is not a thesis statement at all. It's just a sort of brainstorming exercise to get you thinking about what your paper might be about and what your thesis statement might be. But I wanted to mention what is it that professors are actually looking for in a thesis statement? What will they think is a good one? And two things to really avoid are an obvious thesis statement or a cliche thesis statement. Those are the two things they don't want to see. So what does it mean to be obvious in your thesis statement? Two things to avoid. You don't want your thesis statement to just be a statement of fact. because that's too obvious. Medea was written by Euripides. Anything that's incontestable, anything that's just a fact, can't be a thesis statement. And along those same lines, any kind of sort of wishy-washy, non-committal observation, that can't be a thesis statement because it's too obvious. So here's an example of that. While some might think Medea is a bad person, and others that she is good, really she's a little bit of both. You're sort of not really taking a stand here. You're just saying something that's obvious. People have some good and some bad qualities. So avoid being too obvious in your thesis statement. You also want to avoid cliches. So here is a definition. A cliché is an idea that is so commonly held and so often repeated that it is no longer considered original or interesting. Remember, your thesis statement should be the most original and interesting sentence in your paper. So saying something like, Medea shows that what goes around comes around, or Medea shows that friendship is the most important thing in life, or Medea shows that you should stand up for what you believe in. Those are two cliches. Those are types of things, what goes around comes around. These are types of things that people say all the time. They're just commonly held beliefs. So you want to avoid these cliches as much as possible. So what should your thesis statement look like if it can't look like the examples that I just gave? Here are some patterns, almost sort of templates that you can follow, that really good thesis statements often look like one of these. So pattern 1 is, I'm calling the meaning of the evidence. Look at this example. Through its contrasting river and shore scenes, Twain's Huckleberry Finn suggests that to find the true expression of American democratic ideals, one must leave civilized society and go back to nature. So this is interesting. It's not something that anyone would immediately think when they read Huck Finn. It's a unique observation. And this is the pattern that it follows. Through evidence, contrasting river and shore scenes, the text, Twain's Huckleberry Finn, shows or demonstrates, I use suggest, it doesn't matter, suggests that to find the true expression of American democratic ideals, one must leave civilized society and go back to nature. That's what is the significance of this evidence. So you could follow a pattern like this, and it usually can lead you to a pretty insightful thesis statement. A similar pattern, I'm going to call the significance of the claim. So look at this example. Through the drunken speech of Alcibiades, Plato's Symposium reveals that Socrates affected not only his students' minds, but also their hearts. Therefore, the debate shows us that no intellectual pursuit is strictly rational. So this follows a similar but somewhat more complex pattern. Through whatever evidence you want to talk about in your paper, the text reveals that claim. And here it's Socrates affected not only his students' minds, but also their hearts. And if you want to get away from the text a little bit to make more of a claim sort of about the way the world works, you can follow that up with, therefore, the text shows us that, whatever the significance is. No intellectual pursuit is strictly rational. So this is a pattern that shows up a lot and often leads to a good thesis statement. Here's a really good pattern. It's making a concession and giving reasons. Although Odysseus' physical feats are impressive, he ultimately fails to be a hero because his infidelity and cruel leadership show a lack of emotional intelligence. Or, while many may see Trinity as a feminist because she is a strong leader and fighter, the Matrix is overall a misogynist text because she plays to a subordinate role to Neo. So here's what this pattern looks like. Something like while, although, and then you give an opposing viewpoint to what your actual claim is. Like what other people might think if they disagreed with you. You can put that in your thesis statement. And then you give your claim, the thing that you actually think, your opinion, the thing you're going to prove in your paper. And then you say because or since and give some of your evidence. What are the reasons that you think what you think here? That's a really great pattern to follow for a thesis statement. And this one is similar, but just looks a little different. It's giving two explanations, one that is sort of weaker and one that is stronger. So why did Jane Eyre marry Rochester? As the narrator, she claims it's because she's in love, but a more comprehensive consideration of Bronte's historical context would suggest that Jane was getting old and running out of options. So here's what that pattern looks like. Pose a question, and it can be sort of a restatement of the question your professor wants you to answer, and then give like a plausible explanation and an answer to the question that makes sense but is flawed or incomplete or slightly wrong. And then the rest of your thesis statement, and this is really the most important part of your thesis statement, is where you give a more complete, better explanation that answers the question. So that can also be a really interesting way to demonstrate why your ideas are significant. So with these things in mind that I just mentioned, let's turn back to your worksheet and take step 4 of writing your thesis statement. All that brainstorming information you have, it's time to turn that into a sentence that can actually be a thesis statement in your paper. So your claim is a statement of your position which other people might not necessarily agree with. And that's important. Sometimes people get too conservative with their thesis statement because they want to make sure that they're right. You don't have to be right. It's better to be a little bit questionable, and that will make your paper more interesting. So an example that's based on the other examples that I gave would be something like this. While most people think that democracy and liberty are principles that work together in American history, the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Sentiments, and I Have a Dream reveal that majority rule sometimes causes liberty and democracy to contradict. So, your turn. Go to your worksheet, look at your brainstorming that you've done so far, and try to turn it into kind of a workable thesis statement. Pause the video to work on that if you need to. One thing to keep in mind about the claim you've just made in step 4 is that it's not permanent. When you don't have an essay written yet and you write a thesis statement first, it's never set in stone. You can always go back and change it, and in fact you should change it, because the process of writing your paper and looking at evidence and thinking about your ideas further will often cause your thesis statement to change. So this is only a provisional or working thesis statement that you have now. I want to remind you about the Center for Writing and Speaking. If you go to this link, or if you just Google Ursinus Writing and Speaking, it'll bring you to it. You can make an appointment with one of our writing fellows who will sit down with you with your paper for up to an hour and give you advice about how you can move forward with your revision. You can come even if you don't have your paper written yet, just to brainstorm. And the writing fellows can be really helpful with that. And you can come when you have a full draft done and you just want to make some changes to make it even better. And finally, here are my sources for the thesis statement patterns. Thanks for your time.